This is Think or Sink, taking a look at creating critical thinkers in our classrooms. Now, first of all, you have to look at what is critical thinking. The philosopher Matthew Lipman, in his definition, let's look at a few key words: skillful and responsible thinking. And we want to look and create students that are going to have good judgment, but make sure it's based on criteria. It's self-correcting and sensitive to the context that they're working in. In other words, we don't want it to look like this, where it's confusion and frustration. And we don't want this, where students get done with school and they don't know what direction they're going. We want it to look more like this, where there's formulas in a way that will help them to guide and direct their thinking on a variety of topics. Now you might say, well, isn't this critical thinking just another name for a rose? In other words, isn't it just another way to say problem solving or reasoning, questioning, or logic, or the newly popular higher level thinking skills? Well, in some ways, it is about semantics. In other words, are we just changing guessing, grouping, supposing to things like estimating, classifying, and hypothesizing? Isn't it just about terminology? And yes, maybe we are once again reinventing the wheel a little bit, but I think it's important to have common terminology as we look at any topic. First of all, critical thinking and problem solving and higher order thinking should all be active and explorative. In other words, you want to make sure it looks more like this, where students are actually picking out the valuable information and filtering it. And it shouldn't look like this, where students will be taking in all the information. Especially in our information overload with the internet, we need to make sure students have a way to filter the information they're taking in. Second of all, it should be comprehensive. In other words, we need to make sure we take in all the information, not just from one side. So we may want to take a look at this, but we also want to make sure we look at this. In other words, looking at each topic and getting information, even though some of it may not agree with each other. Also, when we look at critically, it should make sure that we are fluid and flexible. In other words, the facts might change, so our attitude towards that topic may change as well. For example, we thought this for a long time, but then we had to switch to this, and now we're back to this. So as the facts change, maybe our attitude towards those things may change as well. Also, we need to make sure we stick to the facts, just like the infamous detective did years ago. Just the facts, ma'am. And we need to share those facts with others to see if they came up with the same conclusion based on the information that we have. Now, first of all, we want to say, as we talk and we get into the semantics of it, but what will this really look like in the classroom? How will my students react, and what will I actually be able to use as strategies to get critical thinking into the classroom? Well, hopefully, first of all, it doesn't necessarily look like this.
In 1930, the Republican-controlled House of Representatives, in an effort to alleviate the effects of the Great Depression, passed the tariff bill, the Hall.
So hopefully it doesn't look like that. Hopefully it looks a little bit more useful strategies like KWL. In other words, giving students an opportunity to look at things like, what do I know? And what do I want to know? And what have I learned? In other words, using students' prior knowledge and expanding upon that and be able to link back to that at the end of it as well. Maybe another strategy might be thinking maps. We want to use bubble maps and fluid maps. And here's one with actually looking at feedback when thinking maps were implemented. Using these types of strategies, and every student may be a little bit different in how they organize their thinking as well. And so that even creating the thinking map can be part of critical thinking. Also, we can classify. Now this one a lot of times is useful when you're looking at science, but it can actually be used in any type. It's just a way of students being able to look at different topics and being able to come up with some similarities and differences and using, and the most important thing is what types of terms did they use to break those into it. Here we have, for instance, 3 sports, but are they all sports? Is fishing really a sport? Is golf an active sport as soccer? How would you classify these different sports themselves? Also, one way to get students active and engaged is to use debate. Now, it might be done in something that is very formal, like students have to prepare something, and several of them will have a allotted time to get up, or it might be something very personal. One type of thing that many classes are using is speed debate, where students simply go around the room and debate with several different people for allotted time. No, not speed dating, it's speed debating. And one more that's been pretty effective as we look at our students and the need for them to write more is journaling. And this again can be used in any topic or any curriculum area. What you're looking for here is for giving students an opportunity to reflect on what they've learned. And so we want to make sure that students are given an opportunity to look back as well and reflect and identify those things they've learned and possibly even things they've missed. So hopefully what we're going to do by critical thinking is in our classrooms, we want students to be more engaged and active, not like this one, more like, well, she is active, but not very engaged. We want it to look a little bit more like this when we look out into our classrooms, that students are active and they are wanting to participate in the classroom. And it may look like this, where students are up and moving and in groups themselves. So hopefully you can take some of the ideas behind each of these models and use them in our classroom to create critical thinking, because in a digital age, information is not the problem, it's filtering that can be.